Passengers, in my attempts to keep your questions organized in the piles to ask, piles to not ask, I got some in the wrong pile. I just noticed that. So there are a few other questions that you asked that we've talked about, and we're going to ask Dr. Cockrell. So again, Dr. Cockrell, I'll ask the question, but if you could face it through and answer, please.
Yes, sir.
Would the substance that made the HPLC test negative interfered with affect the result of the ELISA test, specifically in regards to cannabinoids?
No, it wouldn't. These are, again, two separate tests, and they don't interact with each other. And the reason multiple separate tests are used in toxicology labs is that some substances are more easily identified by one methodology and others by different methodologies. And ultimately, anything that's identified is going to have to be confirmed and quantitated by yet another methodology. So they have multiple tools in their toolbox, and so whatever would interfere with the HPLC is not going to have any bearing on the ELISA.
Do you think the wounds on Jasmine Pace's left hand were inflicted ante or peri-mortem?
We have some wounds that are more peri-mortem and some that have more hemorrhage in them. And you've seen those photographs, particularly the one that actually severs the bone or fractures the bone and goes on to sever the artery. That's going to be a little closer to death, I think, because of the more pale background or cut edge, if you will, that's showing it. Now, there's certainly still some bleeding in that area, so it's not a post-mortem wound, but I think that's going to be closer to peri-mortem. Conversely, stab wounds through the hand, those have a significant amount of hemorrhage associated with them, so they're going to be more ante-mortem. But and we're kind of on that progression of ante to post, and somewhere along in there, all of these wounds are.
Can you identify the bluish bruise on the victim's forehead near her right temple? Would you like to see a picture of it?
I believe that's associated with, it's sort of a blue-green color, if I'm thinking about that correctly.
Let's get it right.
There's a bit of decomposition there.
That helps. No.
Yes, if we're looking at this area here, we're actually seeing some decompositional change. In other areas that we don't have a photograph of, you'd see that same greenish-blue discoloration in the right lower quadrant of the abdomen. And that is very frequently seen, in fact, almost universally seen, as you're starting to decompose. And the reason for that is that's the closest that your intestines come to the surface of your body. And so we call that green sign. And the right lower quadrant is the first place that we would see green sign in most cases. Anytime that we're going to have decomposition, it's going to be earliest in wounds, because that's where bacteria can get in most easily. And the color will be, to a large degree, dependent on what sort of bacteria is getting in there. Almost universally, it's Staphylococcus species, because that's what we're covered in right now is Staph epidermidis. So all that is just a little bit of decomp.
What is the shaded line that runs the length of the victim's right posterior side, starting near the right scapula and running down the side in this picture?
I think we're talking about this line right here. That is actually, I believe, an autopsy artifact. I think I have already done the evisceration at that point, So the autopsy itself is a Y-shaped incision, and then the skin is reflected back. And that's just basically where the reflection back stopped.
Did you discover any glass particles or determine if any wounds could have occurred from broken glass?
I discovered no glass particles. Any of these wounds that don't have the classic sort of triangular shape with a blunt edge, etc., they potentially, depending on the shape of the glass, they potentially could be inflicted by glass itself. But the majority of these do have a sharp end to each end, or a blunt and a sharp. So there's nothing that I would say, yeah, this is a glass wound, or this wound was inflicted by glass, as opposed to a knife. These are more consistent with knife wounds as opposed to glass wounds.
Was the time of death determined?
It was not. Legally, the time of death is when found. And that's what goes on the death certificate, etc. The farther you get away from the actual death, the more difficult it is to determine time of death, and in some cases even date of death. So legally, the time and the date are when she was found.
Is it your opinion that the victim's hands and feet were pruning due to the moisture in the bags in the suitcase? Was there liquid inside of the bag?
There was virtually no liquid inside the bag except condensation and some blood. So the pruning is going to be basically from the condensation inside the bag with the heating and cooling as she's in different environments or different exposures to outside temperatures while in the bag. The bags themselves, obviously being plastic, are going to be impermeable, and so you're going to easily develop a lot of condensation inside those bags.
Can you redirect based on the jury's questions?
No.
Can you recross based on the jury's questions?
Just briefly. Maybe take that off this week. Dr. Cogswell, you are a forensic pathologist.
Yes, sir.
You're not a forensic toxicologist.
That is correct.
You collected the blood in this case, or at least someone on your staff did,
No, I did.
and it was put in a glass tube stopper,
That's correct.
and you sent it to NMS.
That's correct.
You don't work for NMS.
I do not, no, sir.
Once you send off the blood, you can't guarantee that NMS may have contaminated the blood.
I cannot accept that NMS in any forensic toxicology laboratory that is certified in this country goes through very extensive inspection and review of their policies, procedures, etc. Again, with anything that doesn't violate the laws of physics, etc. It's not impossible that a specimen is contaminated, but NMS is, to a large degree, the gold standard for toxicology laboratories. They don't just do forensic toxicology, they also do clinical toxicology and clinical laboratory testing. So it's a very large company with very extensive inspection, regulation, etc. So the likelihood of any contamination is vanishingly remote, and it's as low as you can get in the real world.
But not impossible.
Nothing's impossible.
Well, it's not impossible that NMS may have made a mistake, right?
That is certainly possible.
And you talked about the certifications, but you don't personally know if the machines that were used to run the blood were properly calibrated?
Actually, I do, because that is part of their inspection protocols and part of the standards. Toxicology is a very rigidly controlled type of operation. And these laboratories, not just forensic toxicology, but also hospital laboratories and clinical laboratories, have multiple different agencies that are looking at what they do, how they do it, and inspecting them frequently to ensure that there is not this this potential for mislabeling, making an error, making calibrations. The instruments themselves have a required set of calibrations that are done before every run of specimens. They don't take Jasmine Pace's specimen and run it separately from everything else. They batch these. They get 100 or so specimens, and they run controls and standards. And the controls and standards before each run of actual toxicology specimen is set up to determine lower limit, upper limit, and where they are on these curves. And these curves are plotted for basically to ensure that the number that they're publishing, that they're reporting, is actually accurate. So is it possible that they made a mistake? Sure. It's completely possible. Is it likely? Absolutely not.
Do you remember a few years ago, there was the gray test tube stoppers that had the preservative in the bottom, but it didn't have enough of the, I don't remember the chemical name, but it didn't have enough of one of the chemicals in there, so that caused blood to not be able to be preserved. Do you recall that a couple of years ago?
I don't, actually.
You don't remember the TBI having an issue with that?
Oh, we don't send our cases to TBI, so that would not be something that I would be aware of.
Why don't you send your cases to TBI?
In order for us to maintain name accreditation, that is the National Association of Medical Examiners, all Tennessee forensic centers have to be accredited by the National Association of Medical Examiners. In order for us to maintain that accreditation, we have a certain time limit in which to sign out our cases. We can't let them drag on forever unless there's a very good reason for it. Because TBI's toxicology laboratory is, quite frankly, overworked, they cannot turn around the toxicology results in a timely manner in order for us to keep our accreditation. Because of that, we have to send the toxicology specimens out to a laboratory like NMS. And that typically will allow us to get the toxicology results back in time to meet the deadline for getting these cases signed out. So this has been an ongoing problem for the last decade or two. So if the issue with the gray top tubes occurred within the last decade, that would be something, a TBI issue, and we wouldn't have been involved in that at all.
Just one moment.
Sir.
Thank you again, Dr. Fox.
Can you read your-
No, Your Honor.
Do you have any further questions for Dr. Cogswell? All right, thank you, Dr. Cogswell. Get the door running.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Again, my apologies for the,
Thanks.
pardon me.
Tim Lowe, Your Honor.
Low.